Thank you all for joining this webinar. Colleagues from OP Jindal Global University and those of you who are joining from outside. How many colleagues are here, Peter, with regards to the co-authors of your paper? Do you know?
Well, there's a few, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.
Okay, great.
Co-authors, yes, and
lovely. So I can see some of my colleagues here from the university here. Good evening, and also some of our doctoral students and research fellows are already here. Great. So let's begin, and I request our IT team, you can please start recording the session. I'll just briefly introduce our speaker today. But as all of you know, that this is a research seminar series, and every semester we try to invite scholars from within India and outside of India who has been doing exceptional work in the field of research and publications. Today we are lucky to have Peter Jandrik. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Please correct me, Peter. He's professor at Zagreb University of Applied Sciences, Croatia, and visiting professor at the University of Wolverhampton, UK. His previous academic affiliations include Croatian Academic and Research Network, National E-Science Centre at the University of Edinburgh, Glasgow School of Art, and Cass School of Education at the University of East London. Peter's research interests are situated at the post-disciplinary intersection between technologies, pedagogies, and the society. And research methodologies of his choice are inter, trans, and anti-disciplinarity. Well, Peter, our university really seeks to promote interdisciplinary teaching, research. We also have academic department planning, a department of academic planning and interdisciplinarity for your information. So I'm sure all my colleagues are going to really be very eager to hear from you with regards to your choice of research methodologies. He's the editor-in-chief. Peter is the editor-in-chief, as all of you know, of Post Digital Science and Education. It's a Springer journal, where a number of our JGU faculty actually contributed in writing their testimonies on teaching in the age of COVID-19. A series of testimonies which were published in 2020 and 2021. A third call has been already released by Peter. And Peter and his another co-author, Sarah, they have also written an analysis paper coming out of these testimonies. Today, we are going to hear more about these two papers and the entire longitudinal research project. More from Peter. Over to you. We are really eager, looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to talk to all of you today. I'm really happy with this. Is interesting because it's actually the first time that I'm speaking about this series of articles, although they have been quite influential over the years now. So let me just quickly start with introducing myself. You said a lot of things about me. So I'm the editor of the Post Digital Science and Education journal and book series. I'm also an academic and so on. I do many major projects, but the thing with this project really is that there are a few important things here. One thing is that when we speak about things such as what an academic should do, what is our role, how do we approach things that we are doing and so on, it's really important to be, I believe, in the moment. I believe that it's really important to live in the present. I believe that it's really important to live in the future. It's not just about analyzing things that have happened, or it's not about researching things that have passed, but actually we, I believe, as educational researchers, have a big and important duty to analyze our present and really to co-create and co-develop our future with our colleagues and other people we know, and perhaps even those we don't know. So there was this, it was early 2020, it was the beginning of lockdown, and post-digital science and education is not just a journal in the book series, it's also a big community. And some of the people who are here, I will now especially mention Sarah Hayes, who is a great colleague and one of the co-founders and associate editors of the journal together with me. It was the beginning of lockdowns and we were in touch. We would connect over Skype or whatever was available at the time, and we would chat, we would have a cup of coffee together and so on. And we were thinking, we saw that something big was happening. We saw that there was something with all these lockdowns and with all these things that needs some critical attention. We were not sure which form this critical attention should take. So, and we were playing with various ideas about how to approach teaching and learning and the problems of education in general in the age of COVID. Mind you that the pandemic started in late December, early January in China. By the time it came to Europe, it was already March, April. Sarah and I were discussing things as we saw them approaching. So we saw lockdowns taking place all over Asia and then moving closer and closer towards countries where we live. I live in Croatia, Sarah lives in the UK. And as we saw things approaching and as we saw how things are developing, we started a few projects. One of the things I did is that I actually launched a call for papers for about COVID lockdowns and the university or teaching and learning in general. And it started with an editorial. I wrote an editorial which was published in, let me see, it was this one, you can see it on your screen. It was published on 21st of March, called Post-Digital Research in the Time of COVID-19. And basically here I invited everybody to all scholars and everybody else to kind of, you see, I wrote post-digital researchers should research and read about all imaginable aspects of COVID-19, even if that research at present does not seem to offer much help in getting us through and over the pandemic. So the idea is that we wanted to research the pandemic, but we were not sure how. It was just the very beginning. So one thing we did is that we invited people to submit all kinds of articles, and these articles ended up in a huge issue of post-digital science and education in October 2020. This issue has 56 different papers, from philosophy to practical papers. These papers come literally from everywhere. So there's papers from Europe, India, Latin America, Africa. I think that we covered all 5 continents in this effort. We also covered many different, Hong Kong, we also China, we also covered many different genres. So we covered things such as, here is a paper from Pakistan, for instance. We covered many things. And one of the things that we also launched together with the call for this huge issue was a call for testimonies. The idea was that we will just ask people to write 500 words about how they feel pandemic changes in their lives and what really happens to them, and to simply ask people to give us 500 word testimonies together with the photograph of their workspace. And this was the article. This ends up in the article, which you can just see on your screen, which is, if you take a look at the statistics, it has a bigger number of citations, but it has 87,000 accesses. So many people actually have read this article, and many people have been interested in the article. And what we did really is that Sarah and I launched this call, and we received about 81 textual testimonies and 80 workspace photos. Now, those were submitted by 84 authors from 19 countries, including notably India, but also China and the US and Europe and Africa and all around, really, again, all around the globe. And the article looks pretty much like this. So what we did is that we just asked people for the 500 words and to show us their workspace in order to, and the photo maybe of themselves, maybe not of themselves, in order that we can see where these people are actually working. And now I can, at the moment, I can see some participants here, and I would like to give special hi to Moses, to Kulprit, if I pronounce your name correctly, sorry, and of course to Sarah, who actually contributed to this article. So for instance, Moses, who is over here, wrote about his experience from Nigeria on the 6th of April 2020 as a PhD student. This is Moses. This is his photo at his workspace, and so on and so on. And once we received all these testimonies, it was a big thing, because now we had a lot of material, but we didn't really know what to do with the material. And again, I'm purposely fully telling you story which really happened, so an honest story about how things came about. So Sarah and I at one point collected all this material, and now the question was what to do with this material. And we discussed those things a lot. We spent a lot of time together thinking, researching, and trying to understand what to do with this and how actually we can approach these things, what we can get from this. And of course, there are two different approaches that this collection can be understood. Now, one approach that you can understand this collection is as a collection of testimonies. So you can understand this collection as a literally collection of people's feelings and ideas and so on. So you can read it as a novel. You can read it as, okay, so let's see what Moses says, let's see what Peter says, let's see what Musumi, Sarah, and whoever says. And then when these people, and you can read those things and you can relate to those people, you can see their feelings, you can see their troubles and so on. You can read it almost as literature, almost as poetry. And this is very important, because this kind of reading actually gives us a certain feeling about the contributions, which cannot really be taken. I mean, it's really important to have this part. But then again, you can also understand the collection as data. So you can understand it, okay, so now we have 80 people from 20 countries telling us what happens to them. How do we connect this data? What are the commonalities? What are the things that kind of work together? What are the things what kind of contributions and what kind of similarities and differences actually can we see from this approach? And Sarah and I wrote this article called Writing the History of the Present, which was meant to be an editorial for this. So perhaps, Sarah, would you like to say something about these two different approaches by now?
Can people hear me?
Yes, Sarah, we can hear you.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to join you. And thank you very much, Peter, for pulling me into the session, and also to you for hosting it, Musami. It's a pleasure to meet you and some of the other authors and people interested in this research. Yes, so as Peter was saying, in the whirlwind of collecting these testimonies, you can think of them in these different ways. And it was really powerful, I think, to collect both text and images from people, and then to be able to think about reading them in this different way that Peter's been describing. We can think of ourselves as individuals in a pandemic in our context, but we can also see this amazing collective piece of writing and imagery that comes before us in the first part of the pandemic, and then a second call to to look again at people's experiences a year later. So I don't know whether you wanted me to comment on the analysis, Peter, at all, or just
I think that we'll go to the analysis a bit later.
Okay.
At the moment, I'm really interested in this because if you remember, Sarah, we had some people who gave us their testimonies and then they withdrew them because they would disagree with all the possible ways that we would do this. So perhaps a word or two, I mean, I can do it as well, if you feel like, about this ethics of data collection, if you understand this as data or if you understand this as a narrative. I think that this tension between data and narrative is hugely important.
Yes, I would agree, and fascinating as well. Really interested to hear people in the session and what they think about this a little bit later on. But yes, some people were willing to just put out the testimony and say no more. Others had questions about if we were to look into it further, the moment we were, placing any sorts of shared ideas perhaps on what these testimonies meant as data, then we move, of course, into different ethical spaces. And for some people, they saw this as very, if you like, clear, crystal clear. You have to have ethics approval before you do this. But I think the kind of approach that Peter took with this was not quite like that. And so, I think probably we were getting into some interesting dialogue about whether or not we were simply working as a broader collective of people and analysing these different aspects of what we were putting out there, and and taking on board, as Peter said, research in the moment, really, the kind of co-development. I'm not sure we can have it both ways and then separate ourselves as researchers, and place it into ethics, but others may disagree. Is that the sort of commentary you were thinking, Peter?
Well, kind of, really. I mean, it's not that I'm looking for anything in particular. I just think that it's a really big story about these articles that we never said, and that actually we were never invited to tell this story in its completeness. And it's actually quite nice to remember all those things. And I think that they could be quite useful as well for the interpretation. So this was something that we did, but we couldn't really do so much with one paper in 1 year. And if you remember, Sarah, back in the day, we couldn't really, we really had no idea how long the pandemic would be, right? So we had no idea if and when this would stop. And then we connected a year later, and we actually had the discussion whether it makes sense to launch another call for contributions 1 year later. And it seems that it kind of did make sense, because the pandemic was not so big anymore, and there was, now of course we already knew much more about the COVID, and there was already some vaccination in place and so on. But 1 year later was still a kind of a situation in which we wanted to revisit those things. So we again so we didn't do much with the first collection of articles, with this collection that you can see right now on your screens, but which I'm browsing through here at the moment. But what we did actually is that we kind of that we kind of launched another the call for another iteration of the paper 1 year later. And this paper 1 year later, which now you will have here at your screen, it's just pretty much the same. It has the same title, called Teaching in the Age of COVID-19 1 year later. And then really this paper has this, so we asked people to address the following themes, like again, where and when are you writing this testimony? Did you perhaps move to another house, another country? A bit about your context. Do you still work at the same place? Did you change work? How has your institution and university adapted to continuation of pandemic lockdowns? How are you dealing with the expectations? Which major challenges, private but also professional, are you finding in your lives? And what are the main feelings at the moment? Stress, anxiety, happiness, whatever. How are you coping with the feelings? How has your feeling about the COVID-19 pandemic developed during the past year? And of course, the last one is the open parts where people can write everything. And what we did here really was that it was amazing actually that the majority of people from the first article have joined us again. And we did have a bit less, we did receive a bit less contributions, but only really a few less. More or less everybody else basically has. So in the first paper we had 81 authors. In the second paper we had 77 authors. Again, 20 countries. Again, people from pretty much everywhere. And this is where the things become interesting, because not only that we now had a huge collection of papers in the Post-Digital Science and Education Journal about the pandemic. Not only that we had this huge paper with testimonies at the beginning of the pandemic, but now we also had some experience, some considerations, some understanding of ways that we may approach this, whether it's data or whether it's like a testimony, like a narrative and so on. And now we had the same people responding to the questions 1 year later. And this thing actually brings me to the analysis part, as Sarah said, because once when we did the second paper, we had, as far as we are aware, the first longitudinal study of actually data about how people experience COVID, because again, we had the same people 1 year later, meaning that we could compare how people's thinking, how people's feeling, and so on have developed. And now, as Sarah also said, it's hugely important to say that we didn't have just texts, but we also had photographs. And now the time has arrived to do something about it. And I've been thinking and talking to Sarah and some other people, how we can approach this as well again. And then we decided to do an analysis article. And in this analysis article, actually, we invited, Sarah and I invited 2 more people to join us. One of the people was Aras Boskurt, and another one was Miranda McKee. Now, the idea is that, as I said, we can treat the testimonies as narratives. We can treat the testimonies as data. And also, since we have imagery, since we have people's images, we can also then do some image analysis and see how things work. So basically, everybody did one thing. So in this methodology part, we divided the work between us, and Aras wrote up textual analysis, Miranda took up image analysis, I wrote the introduction, background, and methodology, and Sarah wrote the discussion and conclusion. So Sarah, perhaps now it would be a good time to say a bit about methodology here.
Yes, I can do, Peter. I'm glancing like you are back through the paper and remembering the kind of approach that we took, and you came up with this rather wonderful phrase of data narratology, including the data, the narrative, and the methodology, so that we were looking at from these different angles within a post-digital context. And as I scroll down, I can get to the bit where I'm doing the concluding thoughts and have a look at that. But what was interesting was that Aras was looking at the text and doing a textual mining approach and surfacing the kind of use of words that we were using in these different 500-word testimonies. And so he was able to show, the way in which the larger group of us were emphasizing different aspects of this experience. In Miranda's case, she was looking at the images, and she did a most interesting thing with comparing the workspaces. And she actually looked at these different images through a particular route of the percentages of things that we were actually including in our images. And this sort of produced a bit of a picture that perhaps in the first part of the pandemic, we just gave very honest photographs of our workspaces. We just opened it up to the world because we were not really prepared for anything other than the scramble to try to teach online, to try to work online, to avoid the pandemic. And we all had such different shapes or spaces or technology to use, or lack of it. And this was all coming through so clearly from the first round of images. And then in the second round, it looked as if we were doing, as Miranda put it, curating our spaces much more carefully, or adding to them, or increasing a few luxuries in them. I mean, some people were working in tiny spaces that weren't suitable, and others were working in, what were clearly home office spaces. So look at Peter's showing at the moment the textual analysis and the homing in of the words that came through, some much more frequent than others in Aras, the analysis that he did. And then we were able to also look at this changes in the way that people had presented their workspaces. So it brought rather a fascinating set of angles, I think, to this idea of data narratology. I don't know if you wanted to say a bit more about that phrasing at all, Peter, and how you came to that.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's sometimes things just come up for no specific reason. I wouldn't say that I was particularly inspired by something or whatever, but the idea was that we had this situation in which we invited people to give us their testimonies and to give us their photos. And it was pretty early in the pandemic. And then later we asked the same people to give us these testimonies again. So now we had a kind of unique, if you want to call it, data set or unique material that we wanted to do something with. Now the question is that depending on different approaches to the material, you also get a very different understanding of what is being researched. So reading somebody's poetic testimony about whatever, I mean, let's for instance see Musumi. For instance, she starts with Pablo Neruda, right? You start dying slowly if you do not travel, if you do not read, if you do not listen to the sounds of life. Now this sends a message, this sends a beautiful message, and this message is important. And this message is really, really, really is something that many people, I adore. I really love this poem. I love Neruda, but I really love this poem especially. And for me, it created a certain sense of a certain feeling of shared understanding. I mean, we are so far from each other in terms of how many kilometers or 1,000 kilometers are between us, and how different we are in terms of language, in terms of many, many, many different things. And yet we kind of connect through a beautiful poem by Pablo Neruda. So this is clearly an example of understanding things as a narrative, right? So because you reading, or another poem that you mentioned was Gray's Elegy, written in the country churchyard, again, full many a very beautiful poem. And then there is the other one by T.S. Eliot and so on. So the type of feeling that comes across here is not really codable really easily. How do you code the idea that somebody mixed Pablo Neruda, Gray, and Eliot together in 500 words to convey a certain feeling, to convey a certain message? How do you code this feeling? How do you code this message? So there is a certain value to reading those things as narratives, which is unique, which cannot be transferred into reading those things as data. But then, as I showed before, you can also do things like this, like Aras did. So you can also do the text mining of whatever. This is the 2021 article, and say, okay, work, home, living, family, year, affected space, children, and so on. You can cluster words, you can cluster concepts, and then with this clustering of the concepts, you can actually see how people see and how people experience the pandemic. And this is a very different approach. In Musumi's approach is poetry. It conveys a feeling which is unique for the moment, which is unique for this person, which can be shared, of course, but which will be differently felt by different people. So narrative is and then we have data. And data is also very useful. I mean, these clusters, or if you take a look at the images as well, so this thing that I'm showing now, it's really useful. So when somebody codes, like Miranda coded this and said, you know, there's a person or no person in the image, daylight, no daylight, one screen, many screens, art, music, and antiques, whatever, screen on, screen off, clutter, no clutter, etc., etc. What you can actually see here is brute force attack. It's when you just code things and you see how those things work. And then when you see how those things work, then you can say, okay, so statistically people are more interested in this, less interested in this, people show this and people show that. And now my idea was that those two approaches normally when you take a course on research methods, you will usually be told that these approaches would exclude each other, because epistemologically they are just non-commensurable. You cannot compare results from data, big data, brute attack, and from poetic reading of something. But what happens if we kind of put those two approaches into dialogue? And what happens if we kind of try to understand the material both as a narrative and as data, and try to make an overarching approach which would involve both of these things, hopefully at the equal or more or less as equal as can be plane. So this is the idea behind the data narratology. The idea is to connect the two things which are not really connected, which actually are in most cases excluded, and which kind of don't, I mean, people are taught at research seminars that those things don't work together, and then actually connect them together. And this is, I think, so this is what we tried to do with this article, what we basically tried to do. And this is why also we needed to invite people, because not everybody can do stuff. So if I'm an expert in whatever narratology, I'm probably not an expert in data, and the other way around. So Sarah and I invited Aras, who is an amazing scholar in this data part, and he's really able to do many good things with the data. And then of course we invited Miranda, who is as successful and as good and as creative in the area of image analysis. And in this way, basically with the combination of those two different analyses, Sarah and I introduced the thing, because this whole research setup was kind of my idea, but then Sarah was the one who actually put all those things together, and who kind of actually discussed things and concluded them. So probably Sarah is the best person to say actually how successful this was, and what were the main challenges here as well.
There's huge challenges, isn't there? But there's also something that really, listening to you speak there, Peter, I was delighted at the way you pulled that idea out, because we were trying to be quite disruptive, and maybe we didn't realize, because as you say, you invited the colleagues to want to do a textual analysis and want to do an image analysis. But this term of data narratology, the reason it seems so important in a post-digital context that we were all thrust into, perhaps in more than we realized during the pandemic, is because of all of the other parts of interacting around us to do with data-driven systems, that suddenly there is a lot of background situation going on with data being gathered on us, much more than we know. We have limited understanding of the analytics, the algorithms, the different things that are happening online, even the capitalist ownership in and around that. And yet we're putting on social media our very heartfelt thoughts on what it means to be in a pandemic. And so I guess for me, some of this work, as I started to try and pull thoughts together in relation to meaning from this and concluding thoughts, is represented here in this little sort of overview, this little visual overview of saying, well, you have people like ourselves who are in a post-digital society, and we all have an individual positionality, where we have our own identity, our own context and families, and then we are being sort of working with theory and data, working with practice and narrative, and at the center of this we've placed a form of praxis that is trying to understand that and trying to make sense of that. And it feels as if this is more important than ever when the pandemic has thrust into, sort of light the disadvantage and advantage of people at all sorts of level within this. And so some of this to me feels that we were trying to make visual aspects that you don't get on your research methods course when you're told your quantitative or your qualitative analysis, and this is how life is. We aren't arguing with principles that go back a very long time, but at the same time we're suggesting that this requires a lot more dialogue. If you're going to research in the present, as Peter has been doing, it requires a dialogue about where we're understanding knowledge to be, where we're understanding data to start and end. What exactly is data? Is the narrative data? It's beautiful and it's poetic, but then again, here is data that is looking, as Peter called it, more brute force data, or rather fascinating images that we would all see differently. So I guess this is where we were going with, this broadening out of what's come out of these testimonies. And I think in the sort of concluding remarks, I think we've left this open for much debate, really. Just having a little look at how we did leave this article, really. Because we sort of took it through the paces, really, of these different forms of analysis, but came back again to the different ways of reading this. And the sort of broader society that we're in terms of blending those two understandings and then trying to disrupt more politicized generalizations of our experiences, because in education, often we use language that can tend to generalize. And what we thought this positionality of individuals did was it shows, the diversity that is the reality of what has actually happened to people in these experiences, rather than what you might call marketized educational language. I don't know whether that takes us anywhere to further thoughts from you, Peter.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's really great. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And with this this is the project that we've really been doing for so long that now it's really nice to reflect on it. I would probably just say that when we speak about praxis and when we speak about collaboration, this often looks like a top-down project. So I usually send the invites or communicate with people. You, Sarah, are doing your part of the job. Everybody else is doing their part of work, and so on. But the idea is that really neither you nor me, Sarah, actually thought about doing one more iteration. And then Musumi emailed me a couple of weeks ago and asked something else. I think that it was about, would you like to give this talk or something? Maybe it was some other question, never mind. And then she asked me, well, by the way, are you planning to do one more iteration of the collective article? Are you going to do one more article? And I've been thinking, I didn't really, I was taken with some personal things, and I was also kind of, the pandemic has kind of became the new normal. Things have gone into their regular, I don't think that we are going back to the old normal, but also we are not really at the moment in times of so much distress. There are other things. There's the war in Ukraine. There are many world news that actually now look much more dramatic than the pandemic. So we kind of, the humankind kind of got used to the pandemic. And I didn't really feel perhaps that it was necessary to do one more article. But then when Musumi asked about, would you like to do one more article? It got me thinking. First I said, well, no, but then I was thinking. Then I was having a coffee the day after and I was thinking, well, what if she's right? So what I did, if you remember, Sarah, I emailed you and asked, what do you think about making one more iteration of this paper, maybe to do a third paper on the same topic? And you said, well, it could be interesting because of this and this, and it could be this, it could be that. So finally, we decided to actually do the third iteration of the article. And the call is currently open and people are actually sending their invites, their contributions. At the moment, we only want contributions written by people who contributed to the first two articles. In this way, we want to maintain this methodological approach where actually we trace the same people across a number of years. Response by now was decent, was okay. I received quite a few responses already, and the deadline is in a couple of weeks, so I'm sure that we'll get most others in as well. And what we did here, what we will end up with at the end will be 3 testimony articles written across the span of 3 years. a few analysis articles from our History of the Present article, and then this article with Aras and Miranda as well, which is called the longitudinal study. And then we will have more material for more longitudinal studies. And basically we will now be able to add one more year, and we will be able to see how things are working in this way. So excuse me, over the time, we actually amassed quite a lot of material. And now the question is whether this approach that we took is the only, I mean, are there other approaches that we could perhaps use here? Are there other ways that we could use this material? Are there other possibilities? And so on, because this is not so common in, I mean, people do occasionally do longitudinal studies over the years in educational studies, but those studies are not so common. I mean, there are some, but they are not very usual. And with the pandemic, we basically managed to capture some ideas and some thoughts at the very beginning and then trace the people. So we do have quite a unique collection. And now the thing is, and this is where I would perhaps like to stop this presentation, at least in the form of presentation. I would first again ask Sarah if you would like to add something. And then I would actually like to talk to a few other people who contributed to our, like Musumi and Kulprit and whoever is here at the moment, to see actually how they felt, how this exercise felt from their side. And then after that, we could probably discuss with the student, and Moses as well. Hello, Moses. And then we will discuss with the others, how can we use this material and what can be done with it methodologically and so on. So Sarah, perhaps if you could just, if you have anything, of course.
Yes, no, just the thought that was occurring just then, as you said, about the longitudinal side of this, and we talked about it as a narrative and data and, you know, the different views in on that. There's also, there is the individual meaning to individuals in writing a short testimony, and to keep rewriting in a different time scale for each successive one. There is also the collective writing aspect that I know you're exploring in detail with a lot of people, Peter. So I was just going to mention that in case people want to discuss it from that angle, because collective writing is something that Peter has involved me with other people, other friends over the years. And it's a very powerful process in and of itself. Although
Can everybody hear Sarah?
No, Sarah, you froze.
I know it all went completely blank here.
Yeah, but now you're okay. Now you're okay. Now we can hear you again.
We can hear you.
That's good. Yes, I'm sure I did something I shouldn't just then. It seemed to happen at the same time as the presentation came down. It's probably my machine. But yes, no, I was just commenting really on the power of collective writing, which is something Peter will be able to say so much more about, but very interested to hear people's experiences on that, and to, as he says, to hear from those who are present will be lovely.
Yeah, so are we gonna start with Moses? Is your internet connection okay? Can you talk to us?
You will need to unmute yourself.
Okay, should we just start with somebody else and then perhaps connect Moses again? Who would like? Musumi, perhaps? Would you be the first to break the ice?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Peter, first for responding to my request to do this webinar. It has been an interesting journey for me personally to respond. Tenzin, you need to mute yourself. we can hear your voice and some noise in the background. Tenzin Dolma, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Please mute yourself. You are unmuted. Please mute yourself. Thank you. It has been a really interesting journey, frankly speaking. I still remember when I saw the first call for papers on a social media site. It was shared by one of my former mentors, who I guess Peter also knows quite well. I didn't know Peter at all at the time. I just knew about the journal Post Digital Science and Education. So I saw that a call for testimonies, just 500 words testimonies for a collective writing piece. Now, I did do one collective writing like that several years ago while I was myself a graduate student in the US, inspired by this mentor who actually does a lot of, Michael Peters has done a lot of collective writing himself with a number of his colleagues and students. So they were, that was my first experience many years ago. You know, there were like 16 of us, the entire class of students and the 2 faculty. We wrote an article together on post-Occidental world. And that was my first experience. And I kind of enjoyed that experience of collective writing on a particular theme. So when I saw this call for writing about teaching in the age of COVID-19, I immediately thought of responding to it, as I was myself struggling, even though I had prior online teaching and learning experience prior to the pandemic, but within the university context where I'm working right now, and particularly in the context of the pandemic. I had taught online before, not in the context of a pandemic. So I was struggling myself, so I thought of responding to the call. But at the same time, I thought, let me share this call with some of my colleagues here at the university. So I shared the call for papers through our university email to several of my colleagues, and also, colleagues outside of my university. I shared the call for papers, and it happened. So 7 of our colleagues here, including Kulpreet from OP Jindal Global University, responded to the call. And that's how we submitted our testimonies to Peter. And after a year, I saw another call whereby he was asking all of us, those who contributed in the previous one, to share our experience after a year of the pandemic, how we have evolved in terms of our own teaching practices and thinking and all those things he just shared with all of you. And by the time, I had also personally experienced a lot of deaths around, and that's where I was, the Pablo Neruda's poem came into my writing, and also in the month of April, Eliot's poem also came into my mind, and I was particularly very shocked by some very young people dying, people whom I know in the middle of COVID, not just older people. So, it was kind of all those. At the same time, I was teaching a course on global citizenship to college students, where all kinds of mobilities were restricted, still restricted. We were still teaching online last year. And it was very, very hard. And also in the context of the pandemic, it was harder to teach the course on global citizenship. And that's when a colleague of mine in China approached me to teach the course in a collaborative mode, collaborative online learning mode. So that was an interesting experience for me, as I was struggling myself. The way I designed the course prior to the pandemic, I could not run the course in that way because it involved a lot of practice aspect and engagement and projects which we could not do in the online mode. but it brought in a very different aspect altogether because of this collaborative, the proposal. I got this from this colleague in China. So I responded to the call again, to Peter's call again. And then when I saw the analysis that Sarah and Peter wrote, that intrigued me even more. Especially the methodology and this entire thing about data narratology. Frankly speaking, this is something I personally never ever heard of. And I was really wanting to learn myself from both of you how we actually did it. And of course, the data is so rich. If you look at data, but if you also look at it as narrative, it's such rich narrative, all these testimonies coming from such people from such diverse background, but all facing similar kind of situations in the middle of the pandemic. So that's how I responded, and I also thought that now that we are coming to a new normal kind of teaching and learning kind of mode in universities where campuses around the world have opened up, probably a third series of testimonies can bring to the forefront some of the issues of the new normal. Because we haven't gone back to the old normal. The pandemic, the way it was in the with the lockdown, it's no longer the same. Teaching and learning is no longer just fully online. In many campuses, like in our own campus, it's in a blended mode, which has brought in its own series of problems and issues. So I thought maybe it would be good, and that's how I suggested Peter, and I personally am looking forward to read some of those testimonies from other colleagues to learn from them what's happening in other parts of the world, because it's also my own curiosity to learn from these testimonies what's going on in other parts of the world. And I really thank Peter for thinking about a project like this, and asking people to submit testimonies, because this is really a wonderful historical document, this series of testimonies. And I'm sure in the future, many researchers will find different ways of analyzing and writing up about the pandemic experience based on this testimony. That's all I could share at this stage from my side. And thank you all for your attention. And thank you, Peter and Sarah.
Well, thank you very much. This is why I find it really relevant and important, many of the things that you said. One of the things is that, like Sarah mentioned as well, this is a collective project, and we are all indebted to Michael Peters in one way or another, because he is the one who turned our attention to collectivity as a mode of academic production many years ago. And perhaps we should address this collectivity. Perhaps I can just recommend the Michael and some other people. We did a book quite recently about it. You can drop me an email, I will send you a PDF and so on. So I don't want to go too deep in there, but basically the idea is that, yeah, it was the beginning of the pandemic. I was itchy. I knew that it was the time to act. I knew it was the time to do something, but I didn't know what. And there was Sarah on the other side who had the same itch, who had the same feeling of urgency and importance, that we should not just stay at home and drink beer, but we should actually do something while those amazing changes at the beginning of the pandemic are taking place. So we knew that we needed to do something, but it was actually extremely hard to narrow down what we wanted to do. If you remember, Sarah, how many meetings we had and how many emails we exchanged and so on. It was a lot of just chatting, discussing, but also quite serious discussions about how do we actually capture this moment? What do we do with this? And then when we got the material, And we got all this crowd wisdom inside. So we had people who asked us about ethical approvals. We had people who sent us poetry. We had people who sent us, well, whatever. We had people who really contributed in many, many, many ways and who gave us things that surprised us, things that we would never expect, things that we were ideas, new viewpoints, new understandings. And then, so, okay, so what do we do with this now? So last year it was data narratology as something that we thought that would be, that was kind of a result of our understanding of what we are dealing with at present. But then this year we will get one more. So we will have 3 years in a row. And also, as you said, very, very importantly, Musumi, we are in the situation where we are not really in the same situation like 3 years ago. So we are kind of approaching this new normal, or however you want to call it. And so, yeah, so what can we learn from these experiences? I mean, we do understand that we have a historical document. I am very conscious about history. So I know that this will always, even in 100 years from now, this will always be a historical document on how people from all around the world working in teaching and learning have experienced and understood lockdowns. And I think it's important like a historical document. But educational research is not just about history, it's about creating the future. I started this talk with the focus to the present and to the future. And with the question, so what do we do, as you said, Musumi, how do we learn from this into a new normal? How do we establish whatever new normal that would be better than the old one? Not just, and how do we actually, so how can we learn from those things? Now, we still don't know, and it's an open process. And this is why this conversation is like this. And this is why at some point we were thinking of, I didn't really, I've been thinking for a few days how to prepare this presentation. I could have done a PowerPoint, I could have shown it like this. So, you know, we did this. There's so many strict things that I could just show you slide by slide. We did this, and this. But basically, instead, I opted for showing, you know, vulnerability and openness, and the idea that lots of the time we had no idea what we were doing. And that this data narratology is not a method that is a product of brilliant whatever. It's a product of necessity. We were grappling with a problem and we were thinking how to approach this problem. And nobody is saying that our way of approaching this problem is particularly good. There are probably better ones. We need to think about, because it's not just about the pandemic, it's not just about lockdowns, it's not just about the new normal. This is also very deeply a question of educational research. What do we do actually as educational researchers? How do we approach our research? What is our research, by the way? So these are all the questions that we are kind of still grappling with. Now we are working on the third edition of the paper. So when we get the third edition, we will have even more material, which is, by the way, openly published, so everybody can use it, which is also very important because we hope that somebody else will use this material as well. And actually, I would invite people who are here, PhD students, but also others, and people who would like to play with this, to simply use the material for their own stuff. I mean, some of these papers have been cited quite well. Some of these papers have been recognized as well. So those of you who are co-authors on the papers, and if you have Google Scholar profiles and so on, you can see not just how many people cite these papers, but where these people come from and in which context they use them. And that's really interesting. These papers are being used in medicine, in sociology, in history, in law, in education. They're being used by people working in all different fields. This is also hugely interesting. they're not just used by teachers, they're used by people working in many different fields. So how can we move on? And I think that this is actually, we are just approaching our last 15 minutes. I think that it's actually a beautiful topic for conversation. How can we, with the participants, how can we move on with this project? What else can we do? I mean, Sarah and I do not own the project or the material. We just did it because we actually wanted to open it up as much as we can.
Peter, I think Moses is able to speak now.
Oh, perfect. Moses, hello.
Hello, thank you very much. I really appreciate this platform, and I really appreciate this particular Zoom program. I can see categorically that this opportunity given to write the experience about the COVID-19 has already given me a lot of time to reflect on how it really affects education in particular in my country. And as a debutant anyway, this happened to be the first collective writing that I would do. The subsequent one happened to be with the Professor Michael Peter. And I can say categorically that the way I got the information was from a friend of mine who actually he completed his PhD in China. He could be regarded as my namesake because with BMOC they were different in surname. So it was the one that gave me the link to this paper in the first instance. And since I've been participating in this particular collective writing, I can say categorically that Professor Peter Jadwick really is a scholar to really reckon with. He has been a kind of person that I can say through this particular social media, I've been under his tutelage and I've gained tremendously. But one thing I realized is that from the experience, Ghana, from the people's perspective, people's experience so far, I discovered that we have a distinct experience as far as COVID-19 is concerned. The first write-up made me to realize that my personal experience as far as my university is concerned, which is the University of Ibadan, is quite distinct from, a little bit distinct from other people. Because for a whole year, for a whole academic year, we couldn't do anything just because perhaps the government couldn't know what to do at that particular threshold. And just because maybe the school generally was not used to short kind of pandemic, something like that. So it made the academy, everybody to experience what we call academic gridlock. And for a whole year, a whole session, I couldn't do anything on my PhD other than to be reading extensively. But what I gained, I can say at least out of that particular shocking experience, at least what I can see as a positive thing is that it's make me to be globally connected with different people all over the world. And I was able to still participate in some of the Zoom programs, some of the seminars, and even much writing from there. So through that, I was able to see that despite the fact that this thing really affected us academically, at least it still makes us to have the opportunity to see people, to talk to people from another client and to really feel their experience. Though the only unfortunate thing is that it affected some of the countries in the Western world, sorry to say. And it was really a kind of shocking experience that we don't even pray for such kind of experience to rear its ugly head. But notwithstanding, we are still able to at least meander the problems. And what I think is now something that my country, as far as Nigeria is concerned, or the University of Ibadan in particular is concerned, is that we are able to blend up with the blended method of learning. Though that thing is subsided now because people are now seeing COVID-19 as the past experience. And even when the Omicron still came on board, the way people reacted to it seems as if maybe because they have never seen all this death row, the way other countries has experienced it. So, but I think this particular platform has already, it has given me a lot of opportunities to really interact with people globally and to really feel to feel what they feel. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Moses, for sharing your reflection. And frankly speaking, I agree with you. You know, this writing this testimonies was also a moment for self-reflection as a teacher. And we are all trained as teachers to be reflective practitioner, right? And particularly in the middle of the pandemic, that is the writing these collective testimony was also a moment of publicly practicing the self-reflection in terms of our teaching and learning practices. And also, since we were physically isolated and locked down inside our home workspaces, personally, from my perspective, I would say I kind of felt really, it somehow gave me personally a feeling of being supported. You know, when I was reading the testimonies of other teachers from other different parts of the world, I felt like, okay, we were all on the same boat. We were all differently, though. We, even despite all the differences of context, we were all going through some. We were all in the middle of the pandemic, right? Though we were managing it, dealing with it differently because of the context. So personally, also it helped me overcome the serious, it was kind of depressing, the sense of isolation after after a few months. I guess it was common for everybody in this room. We don't have much time. We have another 10 minutes before we wrap up this session. At this stage, I would really like to call some of my colleagues and students over here to ask some questions to Peter Jandrik and also to Sarah, who's here. Any questions? Yes. Raju, you want to ask something? Go ahead, please. Raju is a wonderful research fellow at the International Institute of Higher Education. Go ahead, Raju. You're not audible, Raju, for some reason. We can't hear you.
We can hear you now, I think.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yes, you are audible now. Okay. But your audio is coming, probably you're logged in from two systems. Your audio is coming from the other. Just go ahead.
Reasons, yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask Professor Peter that did you receive any kind of testimonials from the university administrative staff, especially from the, for example, like hostel wardens, right? For example, our university is completely fully residential campus. So for example, the way faculty they deal with the students, for example, before the pandemic, yes, the students and faculty they share very different relation, right? But as well as the some university administrative staff, especially like the hostel wardens, they also used to share a kind of different relation with the students. Suddenly the pandemic happened and suddenly everything is, went off. So did you receive any kind of testimonials in that sense? Like, yeah, I just wanted to ask.
Well, first, thank you so much for organizing everything, and your emails and everything were really beautiful. And it was really, I mean, I really joined the compliments that Busumi gave you. It was really wonderful to work with you on preparation of this. Now, the thing is that when the pandemic started, I didn't really know what to. Sarah and I didn't engineer. We didn't really invite people. What we did is that we sent out an invitation. We wrote a call, and basically this call ended up on, people would forward this call, and this call ended up on different websites, and people just came. And you can trace some of the people. So for instance, like Moses said, just before the pandemic, I was visiting professor at Beijing Normal University in China, visiting Michael Peters. And Michael Peters had this student also called Moses. And actually, Sarah has an article with Moses, with the Chinese Moses as well. But he is not really Chinese. He is Nigerian, and so I launched the call in Croatia. Michael picked up the call in New Zealand. He forwarded it to his colleagues in China, and from China, the call ended up in Nigeria. And that's how Moses came in. So we are already mentioning 4 continents in one or two, in a few clicks.
That's how I got it in India also, Peter, through my.
Yeah, you got it similarly. And I can trace, actually now looking back, I can trace most of the people, how they came, because I know that Sarah works with somebody at Wolverhampton, somebody has colleagues somewhere else, and you can actually trace how the call came to most of the people. So we did have some Chinese students. We did have a bit of Croatian students because I work in Croatia. We have some people from the UK, obviously, because Sarah is in the UK. And then we have people coming from all these numerous connections. So this was not, Raju, this was not planned at all. This was totally random. Now, it's a methodological problem, of course. It would be better if we could cover, so we have 7 people from India, I think, but everybody from the same university. It would be much nicer to have 7 people from 7 different universities in India.
I did send it out, Peter, for your information. I did send it out through our monthly newsletter, which goes to almost all universities across India and those who are engaged in the field of education research. But for some very interesting reasons, those who responded to the call were all from my university.
No, I know, but it's not, it was just said, it's like those things have happened all around the place. So in China, we have the same thing. We have something like 7, 8 contributions from China, from 1 or 2 universities as well. In the UK, we have people from just a few institutions. From Croatia, we have people only from my institution. This has developed organically because it was not planned. It was not a research setup. This is not a PhD. This is not that you have 1 year of preparation and then you identify your target group or whatever. And that's why this presentation is so, that's why we are so laid back here, and that's why we are sending because this is how things went. We literally sent out this to the mailing list, and the call simply has acquired a life of its own. And this reflects in the people who are actually represented, to answer your question, in there. People who are represented are people who are represented. Moses came in because he has a friend who was studying in China at the moment. There's nothing, that's it. There's no, this was not a part of design.
And also to respond to Raju, your question, the call for testimonies, the title was Teaching in the Age of COVID-19. So the call was specifically targeted for teachers to share their teaching experience, hostel wardens, other administrative staff that you're talking about, you would like to learn about their experiences. The call was really not targeted to capture their experiences. The call was a general call for teachers in higher education to share their teaching experience in the middle of COVID-19.
But even that was not conscious. I was, when I wrote the title, I thought I just wrote it because it seemed like a good idea at the moment. I'm not sure, Sarah, did we write it together or you came in slightly after?
That I'm not quite sure, but I did want to comment, Raju, in relation to your question, because I actually think it's a really important question. And I think it's exactly as Peter has described it, how it played out. but do you not think this is sometimes the interpretations around what we mean by teaching, because teaching includes our administrative, our professional services staff, and many collective articles include students and staff of all aspects of the teaching environment. So really, as Peter says, there was no conscious reason, you know, for people not to participate, but it's where it traveled organically as to who did participate. But I think it's a very important question, because it calls into question what our learning environment is and who participates in it. So thank you for asking it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Another last question from anybody else? Any of our doctoral students here? I can see, I don't want to call out your names, but I can see some of you are here. Don't feel shy. Also, some of my colleagues who are here, I can see. Last question for the author and the presenters. No? All right. Thank you, Peter, and thank you also, Sarah, for sharing the thoughts and the process. And I think it's really important. And I'm going to share this other article that you just both of you co-authored, Writing the History of the Present. I think it's really important to capture the present with, I think we can share the link of the article in the chat itself. Because, you know, we all realized that we are in the middle of a historic moment, something which we haven't, you know, something, of course, it happened over about 100 years ago, the last pandemic, the Spanish flu. And we also have all these historic evidences of pandemics happening every century. But, you know, we none of us experienced anything like this before. And we realized, all of us, that we are in the middle of a very unique thing happening in human history. And it's important to document people's experiences, particularly those of us who are involved in teaching and learning in higher education. And thank you, Peter, once again, for thinking about, even though you said you were not, you didn't plan it in that way, it was more of a random kind of thought to capture the history of the present. But the fact that you thought about writing the call and sending it out there, and taking this you know, taking this chance, so to say, to bring us, which actually brought all of us together to write these historic testimonies. I sincerely thank you for taking the lead in doing this, and thank you also for sharing the process with all of us over here. This is probably going to inspire some of my colleagues and doctoral students here in a big way, because the way academia trains us into doing research can often times get a little scary for many people. But you can also do research, think about research, and think about, you know, history writing in a different way. That is something, good thing that we learned from you. And thank you for also helping us connect with so many other people around the world. With that, I would like to wrap up this session. Thank you all those who joined us this evening. Hope it was a good learning experience for all of you, and hope someday we'll be able to invite all of you to our campus here in India. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Very
everybody.
much.
It was great talking to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.